All right, today we're tackling one of the most raw and difficult stories in the Bible, the assault of Dinah in Genesis chapter 34. I mean, it is a truly brutal story of violence and revenge. But what if there's more going on here? What if, hidden just beneath the surface, is a story about consequence, justice, and even spiritual renewal? And that's really the big question we're asking. How do we unlock those deeper layers of meaning from a text that seems, honestly, tragically straightforward? Well, it all comes down to knowing how to read it. And for that, we're going to get some help. We're going to read this story alongside one of history's absolute legends of commentary, Rashi. He was an 11th century scholar whose insights can totally transform the way we see this story. So, let's get into it. The story kicks off in Genesis 34, and it seems simple enough. Now Dinah, the daughter whom Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. But hold on. Right from that very first sentence, Rashi spots a little puzzle. The wording here is specific. Why is Dinah called the daughter of Leah and not the daughter of Jacob? I mean, Jacob's the patriarch, the head of the whole family, right? This might seem like a really minor detail, but for a commentator like Rashi, there are no wasted words. Every choice matters. Rashi immediately connects this to an earlier verse where her mother, Leah, also went out. He suggests the text is giving us a hint, subtly linking Dinah's act of going out, which leads to this disaster, to a similar trait in her mother. It's a small observation for sure, but it sets the stage for a much, much deeper reading of what's about to unfold. And from there, the narrative takes a very dark turn. A local prince, Shechem, assaults Dinah. The text uses 3 distinct verbs to describe what he did. He took her, he lay with her, and he afflicted her. Now, to us, those last 2 might sound kind of redundant, but Rashi sees a horrifying difference between them. So first, Rashi takes the phrase, he lay with her, and he explains it in its most direct clinical sense. The act was done in the natural way, vaginally. This is the first part of the crime. But then he defines he afflicted her as a second, completely distinct act of violence, an unnatural assault, anally. With this one comment, Rashi argues that the text is describing not one, but 2 brutal acts, adding this layer of calculated cruelty that you would just completely miss otherwise. So, in the aftermath of this, Shechem's family comes to Jacob's family with a marriage proposal. You can imagine how that went over. Dinah's brothers, however, they respond with what the text calls bimirma. Now, this word is usually translated as guile or deceit, but Rashi chooses a different word, cleverly. He even points out that the scripture itself kind of justifies their cleverness, saying it was because he had defiled their sister Dinah. But the cleverness, the deception, it doesn't stop with the brothers. Rashi points out some very subtle deception happening on the other side, too. This is brilliant. Just check this out. When Jacob's sons make their fake offer, they say, "We will give our daughters and take yours," which positions them as the ones in control. But then, when Hamor goes to sell this deal to his own people, he flips it. He says, "We will take their daughters and give them ours." It's such a subtle twist, but it's designed to make his people think that they hold the power, so they'll agree to the deal. It's a classic bit of political spin. And it works. The men of Shechem agree to be circumcised. They fall for the whole thing. But the brothers' plan was never, ever about peace. It was about revenge. And at this crucial moment, the text specifically identifies Simeon and Levi as Dinah's brothers. Again, Rashi says this isn't just stating a fact, it's an honorific. The text is calling them her brothers at this moment precisely because they were willing to risk everything for her honor. And they follow through. On the 3rd day, when the men of the city are at their absolute weakest from the circumcisions, Simeon and Levi attack. They kill every single male, including Shechem and his father, and they take Dinah back. But this story doesn't end there with some heroic rescue. No, it immediately pivots to this incredibly tense confrontation inside the family. Their father, Jacob, is absolutely furious. And Jacob's response is completely pragmatic. He is terrified. He basically says to his sons, "You've made everyone hate us. They're going to gather their armies and wipe us out. We're finished." For him, this is all about survival. But the brothers fire back with this sharp, emotional question that just cuts right to the heart of the matter. Their response isn't about strategy, it's about honor and justice. And right here, Rashi gives us what might be the most crucial insight of the entire story. The Hebrew word they use, haksona, is often translated as like a whore. But Rashi says it means something deeper, as one unprotected. Think about what that changes. The brothers aren't just saying she was shamed. They are screaming at their father. Should she be treated as someone with no one to protect her? As someone who's just abandoned and fair game? In their eyes, their violence was a direct response to what they saw as their father's failure to protect their system. Now, this is where most readings of the story just end. But Rashi sees a direct connection between the trauma of chapter 34 and the seemingly random events of chapter 35, where God suddenly commands Jacob to go to a place called Bethel. Rashi's interpretation here is just stunning. He says God's command to go to Bethel isn't random at all. It's a rebuke. He argues that the entire tragedy with Dinah happened because Jacob had delayed fulfilling a vow he'd made to God years earlier. In Rashi's view, the violence wasn't just a tragedy, it was a punishment for Jacob's spiritual negligence. And this timeline just lays it all out perfectly. The crime happens in Shechem. Rashi frames it as the consequence, the punishment for Jacob delaying his journey. This finally forces Jacob to act. He purifies his household, getting rid of the idols they looted from the city, and he finally completes his journey to Bethel. And it's only then, after the family has been cleansed from the trauma and its spoils, that God appears again and renews his blessing. Through Rashi's lens, these two chapters just snap together. What looked like a disconnected sequence of events, horrific violence followed by religious journey, becomes a single, unified story. It's a story where personal tragedy is completely tangled up with spiritual responsibility. So by reading between the lines, a commentator like Rashi transforms a brutal story into this profound exploration of cause and effect, family duty, and spiritual accountability. And it really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How many other stories that we think we know have a whole other layer of meaning just waiting for us to look a little closer?